Good day, everyone. This is a Q&A and a discussion episode about episode 9, part 2, and part 3, in which we have discussed the multicellular organisms' emergence into life. And we have discussed that those organisms cannot be traced back to their unicellular ancestors, according to the theory of evolution. And this is a major failure in the predictions of that theory, that asserts that very slow and gradual evolution of life happens from a common ancestor, they call it Luca, which is a very primitive unicellular organism. So if there is a complete dichotomy between what has been unicellular life and multicellular organism life, this is a major problem to the theory, and I claim that this alone should be enough for the total failure of this theory. At the end of episode 9 part 2, I urged everybody who watches the episode to do the research for themselves and find out the truth for themselves. And indeed, I have received hundreds of comments. Many comments had papers attached to them, links, and those papers claim that, or they at least understood that the papers claim that there is a path of emergence of multicellular life from unicellular life. I have responded to all comments, and almost all of them share the same feature, that those papers are talking about unicellular organisms that typically can be found living solitary, so one unicellular organism living alone, where it is put under a certain degree of pressure, and hence that cell will group with other unicellular organisms into what is very well known to be a colony. And since I have received many of such comments and papers, I have issued 1 week later another episode, which is episode 9 part 3, which addresses the matter of colonies and making a very clear distinction about the very obvious differences between what is a colony, which is a group of unicellular organisms living together, and what is a multicellular organism, which is obviously a complete organism where cells group together, specialized ones group together into specialized tissues that form specialized organs that together form systems, and the collection of the systems forms an organism. And the organism now is the identity, is the entity that is thriving, is the entity that is seeking survival, is the entity that is reproducing. The mode of reproduction is not the issue. It can reproduce by budding, it can reproduce by fragmentation, by sexual reproduction. This is not the issue, but the identity is for the organism. And 1 week ago, I have started receiving comments about another channel called Vice Rhino that has actually issued a response to my episode, two-part response. That I have watched. I have even commented to Vice Rhino. I told him I will make a response, and I asked him to pin my response under his video. So since he addressed many of the papers and many of the comments that I have received, I find it to be a good idea to look into his response, go through it, and then we will even go into the papers that I have received from you and some of the papers that he has actually also linked to his video. And since this will take plenty of time, we will do it actually on multiple episodes. So let's start doing exactly this. So here is the video of Vice Rhino. So let's see what he has to say.
Viced Rhino here. Today, I'm looking at a video that was sent to me by Ewan through my website. It's from a channel called Finding Truth. Well, that's fine. I would prefer to believe true things over false ones, so let's seek some truth.
Does evolution provide a valid explanation for the existence of multicellular life?
It sure does. Now, of course, this happened so long ago that we aren't likely to ever find out for sure exactly how it happened, but there are a few different hypotheses to explain how it definitely could have happened. So,
Okay, just hold on a second here. So you start by saying, it sure does. And then you say, we will never know, and there are different hypotheses. So you have said two things that are exactly contradicting to each other. It sure does means that there is a definite explanation that we are sure of. And then you say, we will never know, which means that this is just guessing. And then you say, there are hypotheses. So you have draft ideas that are unproven. So, okay, good start, but let's be sure that we're using linguistics very carefully here and we're using the right terms.
For starters, the development of multicellularity as a stably heritable trait has been demonstrated to be rather easy. In just 1 year, single-celled algae developed multicellularity as a defense mechanism against a filter-feeding amoeba. They had...
Just hold on a minute. So what you have just said that is something that we will never know now is something that is rather easy and is developed in 1 year? Actually, no. Because what you are talking about here is this algae that is put under a predation threat from an amoeba, and the algae under this threat groups together into colonies so that they can defend each other and have a better chance of survival. This is not like a big algae becoming one big algae organism. It's still, if 1,000 algae come together and sit in a colony, they are still 1,000 individuals. I have argued the same thing in the episode about colonies, but I think that you should have reviewed before doing your response.
5 colonies of algae, and 2 of them went multicellular, each in a different...
Thank you. So you get 5 colonies of algae as a response to the predation threat. So those are colonies, just algae sitting together exactly like you are showing in the pictures. These are not multicellular organisms. Sorry, I don't really know why you are even bothering to present this paper.
Different way, and each was stably heritable and remained so for at least 4 years after the initial experiment, even when removed from the presence of the amoeba, thereby removing the selection pressure. And the stably heritable bit is important. You see, unicellular life had a 1 to 2 billion...
Okay, so we'll stop a little bit here. So one of the nice findings, actually, of this paper is that the algae that has come under the threat of predation from the amoeba has grouped together into those colonies. But after leaving it generation after generation, keeping this structure, the scientists or the researchers then removed the threat. But what they have noticed is that the algae that has come together into colonies for many generations has continued to live together into colonies. So the newly produced algae just likes the idea of sitting together. I don't know really what's the issue here. So you have a single cell algae that now forms colonies, and they got used to it, and they just maintain the shape of colony for some time. They are still unicellular organisms sitting in a colony. I'll give a nice parable to this. So some people are living in a nice countryside, and then they come under threat of a neighboring nation. They go and build themselves a fortress, and they group inside the fortress, and war happens, and they keep defending themselves. But even after the war is finished, they find that the idea of living in a fortress is a nice idea anyway. And even the new offsprings that are produced that leave this one fortress and go to live in some other place, they still select the method of living in fortresses. This does not mean that the individuals have grouped into one big human being who is now a new human being organism. It means that this new mode of living was found to be advantageous. They do not want to regress to the previous mode. Where is the evolutionary path in the first place?
year head start on multicellular life, so it had already adapted to the different environments found on Earth, which means that, while multicellularity might provide an advantage sometimes, it wouldn't necessarily provide an advantage all the time. If a single mutation led to multicellularity, then
now you have gone completely out of the way. There is no place to mutation in what you are saying. Because, you see, I have already made an episode about the difference between adaptation and mutation. And mutation is the matter of copying errors in the DNA of living organisms, and it is effective when it happens during reproduction. And mutation is a completely random process. So mutation follows the mechanism that is stipulated by the theory, which is very, very slow. It's very, very gradual. It takes millions upon millions of years. It is not directed. It is not in response to anything specific. All types of mutations are happening. Negative mutations are ruled out by natural selection. Neutral mutations are indifferent to natural selection. And positive mutations get selected towards them, so they spread into the gene pool through specific calculations related to fixation. And if they produce enough fitness, they can be eventually fixated, and this takes millions of years. So why are you mentioning mutation altogether here? And the point that I have made in my video about adaptation and mutation is that I accept adaptation, I totally reject mutation. So let's look at the experiment that we were talking about. You were talking about an experiment where algae has been subjected to predation for a short time, for 1 year. 1 year, there is no place for mutation whatsoever. All what happened was the expression of the already existing genes of the algae. The algae just triggered the mechanism of following colonies. There is no evolution. It has just expressed a feature that it has. Exactly like many cells, under specific pressures of the environment, like for example, like drought or change into the climate, will go into spore form, for example. It does not happen as a result of mutation. It is a dormant feature in the genetics of the organism that gets triggered in response to the environment. And this is the role of what is today known as epigenetics. Epigenetics will trigger such responses, and guess what? Within the last 10 or 20 years, we have learned that epigenetics can become heritable. And this is exactly what happened to the algae. Epigenetics triggered the response to predation by starting the mechanism of colonization, and then when predation went away, already the epigenetic traits were being transferred from one generation to another, and they got fixated. There is no mutation, there is no evolution altogether. It is just the good old algae behaving in the way it should be behaving under environmental pressure.
That multicellular organism is now one single mutation away from becoming unicellular again, and the closely related
Once again, you're mentioning mutation, and there has not been any mutations. Regardless, if your papers are also using the same wrong terminology, because if there is mutation, please show it to me. Show me the DNA of the algae before being subjected to predation, and the DNA after being subjected to predation, and show me the gene where a mutation has happened, and then explain to me. This is a random mutation. How would a random mutation occur exactly in the required time? And at which cell did it happen? And take notice that this happened in different tests, under different groups. This is an example, this is an experiment that has taken place with many groups of algae. There are control groups, etc. So if it happened at random at one group, did it happen at random at all other groups? Come on.
Unicellular organisms would already be well adapted for that environment. So what is needed is some sort of ratcheting mechanism, a mutation that provides a distinct advantage for the newly multicellular organism that would not be possible as a unicellular organism. So, for instance, if the group of cells develop the ability to divide labor, having other cells do some of the work for them, in return for them doing some different work for the other cells. For instance, one group could grow an important molecule, while another can grow a different essential compound. Then
Okay, so now we're switching to fairy tales, which is, guys, I just want to be very clear about this. This is what I have found going to each single solitary paper that talks about evolution. You start from an acceptable mechanism that occurs in nature, like epigenetic expression, like adaptation, like inheritance, like breeding. Those are things that everybody accepts. We do not need the theory of evolution of species for this. These are things that have been practiced by human beings since thousands of years, breeding dogs, breeding cattle, breeding this and breeding that. We didn't need Darwin or neo-Darwinism to tell us about breeding and inheritance. Mendel talked about inheritance long ago. The matter of epigenetics has been discovered 20 or something years ago, and we didn't need neo-Darwinism there. We understood genetics independently from the theory of evolution. Now you're mentioning mutation. And now you're having these fairy tales, these imaginations about, okay, maybe we'll need to get this one mutation that will create molecules and make this kind of cell specialize in creating this. Prove it. This is the whole point about this theory. There is no proof. Only fairy tales. Only hypothesis. Where is the proof? There is no proof. There is no evidence. And this is a great example, like this discussion. This is a great example to what's happening. Always fairy tales. Always wish lists, but no proof.
That specialization gives them a distinct advantage over their unicellular cousins, meaning that the selection pressures will stop them from returning to unicellular life. At the end of the day, the more research that is being done in the matter, the easier it looks like the transition to multicellularity was. It only happened once each for plants and animals, but fungi appear to have developed multicellularity independently about a dozen. Gives them a distinct advantage being done in the matter.
Okay, hold on here. So, Vice Rhino is now showing us a piece of one of the papers that he has referred to. And this is once more another example about the kind of stuff that is written in these papers. It says, our results show the transition to a simple multicellular life cycle can happen rapidly in response to an ecologically relevant selective pressure. Great! This is what we're talking about. But this is not multicellular life in terms of a multicellular organism. This is multicellular life, linguistically referring to cells coming to live together to protect each other. This is totally irrelevant to the argument that I have been making. I have responded to everybody who have sent me these papers in this way. If you have gone through the comment section, you will have saved yourself the trouble. And even later in my video itself, it is very clear that we're talking about multicellular organisms.
Easier it looks like the transition to multicellularity was. It only happened once each for plants and animals, but fungi appear to have developed multicellularity independently about a dozen times, and algae seems to have developed it at least 3 times, and in addition to the algae experiment that showed the evolution of multicellularity in a single year, there have been other similar experiments.
Sorry, none of what you have mentioned is anything related to a single unicellular life changing to a multicellular organism. They are all just cells coming together into colonies. Please don't use the words in their wrong places. Thank you.
One, with a single-celled strain of yeast, had multicellular clusters develop in less than 2 months, which, again, was stably heritable for more than 3,000 generations after that.
Great. Thank you for showing the image. Here is one cell. Here is the cell grouping. Here is the cell grouping more. Here is the cell grouping even more. Here is the cell grouping even more. And then what happens is that those structures would grow, and then cells in the junctions will break the structure, and the structures will separate into separate structures that will grow or will divide alone. The yeast just stayed yeast. Instead of one cell of yeast living together, they started forming these chains. Where is the organism?
And eventually led to the development of a new mode of reproduction where some of the cells would go through apoptosis, essentially killing themselves to allow the rest of the group to reproduce, which is a rudimentary version of cell differentiation, where the different cells develop different jobs. So at the end of the day, we have seen the development of multicellular.
Now, once more, again, wrong use of language, wrong scientific terminology, wrong conclusions altogether. A cell in the junction of a chain dying, those cells are not eternal. They will have to die. And when cells are formed in a chain and a cell in the middle dies, the chain will break. Why are you calling it apoptosis? Is there a central logic in the chain that has sent a chemical messenger to that cell to self-destruct, and then the cell has received that message and started the chain reaction of apoptosis? This is the meaning of apoptosis in a multicellular organism. Is this what happened? No, it is not what happened. So why do you say a kind of apoptosis? And why do you then call it a kind? There is no specialization. The cell just died. Its time came and it died. And when it died, the chain broke into two. This is not reproduction. The number of cells in the chain was the same. One cell in the middle died, and it's now two chains, and each chain will continue reproducing separate. Is this scientific analysis? Is this the way the theory of evolution makes its conclusions? Is this the way science explainers give the public impressions about the availability of evidence to the theory of evolution? I'm afraid yes. Let's keep listening.
Several times in lab settings, and we know of at least 25 times when it developed independently in the wild, and many of the genes
Nope, didn't happen.
that are important for multicellular development have their precursors in their unicellular cousins.
Oh yes, they have their precursors in unicellular cousins because they have remained unicellular, and what happened is that their unicellular cousins, when they come together, you call them multicellular, while all what is happening is that they're grouping into colonies. Sorry.
Good day, everyone. In previous episodes, we explained that one of the most important features of theories are their ability to make predictions.
Agreed. If a theory doesn't make predictions, then there's no way to test the validity of the theory.
A theory that makes useful prediction is a useful theory. But a theory that makes predictions that then turn out to be false, meaning that when you test those predictions in reality, you find that the predictions are in contradiction with reality. When the predictions are false, and the theory, by consequence, is false.
Kind of. I mean, if it's something with enough evidence backing it up to actually become a scientific theory, then one failed prediction would just mean that a certain aspect of the theory is wrong. But if you're using theory in the colloquial sense to mean hypothesis, then yes, a false prediction means your hypothesis is incorrect.
Well, this is exactly my point, thank you. And I have actually made an episode about that too, which says that the theory of evolution is actually not a theory. It is essentially a failed hypothesis. Why? Exactly for the reason that you have mentioned, because it does not present evidence. What is claimed to be evidence for the theory of evolution is like the papers that you have presented yourself, using tricks of language, making outrageous conclusions without any basis, and then presenting this to the public as if it's a fact that has now manifested itself into a theory that has evidence. Evolution is a fact, and we have a theory of evolution to expose it to us, to explain the mechanisms by which it works. So we have people in the scientific community who have the audacity to say evolution is not only a theory, it's a fact of life, and there is the theory of evolution that explains how this fact manifests into life. Both are false. Evolution is neither a fact and not even a theory, because it has never presented enough evidence for its categorization as a theory. It is a hypothesis, and a failed one. I think this is enough for part 1. And we will meet again for part 2, where we will continue the discussion about what is the truth and what is fake science. Thank you for being with me today. This is a new format that we have not made on the channel before, so I will be developing it as we go, and maybe even this episode got a bit long from me, so maybe I will reformat it and reissue it. But I thought I will broadcast this today because I said that I will give something initial on Saturday. Thank you.